All right, what have I got? Shit, I'm leaving tomorrow, so I'm just freaking.
Where are you going?
I'm going to Dallas. I'm going to. I have the real estate guys event on Friday, so I usually wouldn't leave till Thursday, but Old Capitol has their event the day before, so I'm like, crap, I'm already out there, so I might as well just go see them.
Aren't you going there, Jay?
I'm leaving tomorrow as well.
To go to Old Capitol?
Yeah. What time are you going to be there?
I think I get in at like 3 o'clock their time.
I think I get in at like 3 o'clock their time also.
Welcome to Drunk Real Estate. Grab a drink and enjoy the show.
Hey there, and welcome to episode 18 of Drunk Real Estate. Hopefully we are Drunk Real Estate this week. And once again, for the second week in a row, we have the whole gang back together. How's it going, guys?
Woohoo!
Good to be back.
Jay, how's it going?
I am doing well. I'm drinking again this week, and I'm happy this week. And I've been really energetic all day, just giddy.
Energy?
Energy, yes. There you go.
Back.
Energy is back. And this week I am drinking, I really like the Tito's. So we didn't have any soda or water, so I'm drinking this LaCroix sparkling water pamplemousse. I guess that's a flavor these days. Pamplemousse.
Pamplemousse.
Is that a Canadian flavor?
No, it's French.
French Canadian. So Tito's and pamplemousse.
Fair enough. Mauricio, how's it going over there, dude?
I'm doing better. I was, I'm leaving tomorrow for a trip, so I had all this stuff to do, but I feel pretty good. I got up early this morning, got all my stuff done. So I thought I was going to be grumpy for this one, but I'm not. I'm actually in a pretty decent mood. And I'm drinking a 2021 La Crema Chardonnay. By the way, just a quick shout out to whoever commented last episode from Chile, my home country, and the fact that somebody from Chile is actually listening to this podcast is amazing. I almost busted out the Chilean drink Pisco in his honor, but I ran out of time. And so next time I will be starting to drink some great Pisco, which is an amazing spirit from Chile.
Okay, keep an eye out for that. And then finally we got AJ in his cupboard under the stairs.
That's right. I'm in a hotel room. It looks literally like a cupboard under the stairs. I'm going pretty hard tonight with water.
What's that, a Motel 6 there? With the
I am in Miami Beach, so it can be rough.
That's an $800 room in Miami Beach.
Exactly.
We're just happy that you made it this time, AJ. We'll take what we could get.
Can I complain for a second?
Always. People love complaining.
I drive outside today. I don't leave the house till noon, but noon I leave the house. I get in the car, start driving, and I swear there's a forest fire in my neighborhood. It's hazy and smoky, and I drive 2 miles and it's still hazy and smoky and ridiculous. I call my wife and I asked her, when you were out this morning, because she took the kids to school a couple hours earlier, I was like, was it ridiculously hazy out? And she's like, yeah, it was. And so it was an hour later that I see this news headline that the smoke from the forest fires in Canada is now down in Florida. And my kids' cross country got canceled today. My kids' soccer got canceled today because of the air quality. So
that makes sense because it was smoky here, Jay. So I'm in Miami, everybody. So I came down here for a conference, and I was looking outside, and I'm like, it's kind of hazy here.
So you guys just going to start to blame Canada from South Park for everything right now? Is that where this is going?
I mean, technically it is your fault.
All right. Well, I know you guys are really care, but I'm drinking clear again. A little bit of clear rum. Pretty good. Actually, I have a new bottle of it that I can't open because my wife went to an event and she was with Dallas Goedert of the Eagles, and he signed it. And it was cute. So I can't drink that one. So I had to drink another one.
Why is it called? It sounds like that should be pronounced Clear. Why is it clear? Is that just a marketing gimmick?
Well, because the actual liquid is clear.
No, KLYR. What kind of name is that?
It is 14 times distilled rum. It is clear rum
and American rum.
All right,
none of that Chilean stuff. All right, let's get into this.
Pamplemousse rum.
We're going to change things up this week because we're going to have Mauricio talk about the economy. We'll see if he can, hopefully he can keep it a little bit shorter than Jay's intros. The question,
unfortunately, that is not going to happen. That is not going to happen.
the question on everyone's mind here is are we going to see a recession? And if so, when and how strong of a recession? Is it going to be a little one or a soft landing? And Mauricio brought up a good article from about Goldman Sachs that came out about a month ago, where they reduced the probability of a recession for the next 2 months down from 20 down to 15. 20 was already pretty lenient, but now they're down to 15% chance of recession in the next 12 months.
Recession is canceled.
Yeah, if you listen to previous episodes, you know Mauricio doesn't exactly agree with that. So Mauricio, why don't you just go ahead and blow up their opinion right now?
Yeah, it's like, you know where this is going, right? So Goldman Sachs, in their wisdom, and actually I shouldn't say Goldman Sachs, and I'll make a point about this in a minute. The research division of Goldman Sachs originally had said back in March of 2023, when all the banking crisis had happened and Silicon Valley Bank blew up, all that stuff happened. They were like, hey, it's going to be a 35% chance of a recession this year. And then they, to your point, Kyle, they reduced that rate to 20%. And then a couple of weeks ago, they came out with a report saying, now we think it's going to be 15% over the next 12 months, which is basically just what a chances of a recession on a random year is. I mean, that's kind of what there are. And, I read their article. I've got a couple bullet points. I wanted to kind of first outline their position. I wanted to be that as impartial as possible. I wanted to outline what their thesis was, and then I'm going to tear it apart. So they have a positive inflation and labor market outlook. So they believe that inflation has been coming down, right? We were at 9%, down to 7, down to 6. Now we're continuing to come down, and pretty much because of what's been going on lately, that's going to continue to come down. And we're basically already at this 2 to 2.5 range, or we'll be there very soon, which is in line with the Fed's target. And obviously the labor news, we've talked a lot about the unemployment rate, but they believe that's going in the right direction. And they have a forecast that it's going to continue. Yes, it's going to get a little bit worse, but not too much. They're also substantially more optimistic, more than other forecasters, in terms of what the baseline GDP forecast. They're actually forecasting an average of 2% GDP growth through the end of next year. So they still think we're going to have some pretty good economic growth. Yes, they acknowledge the student loan issue, which Kyle, you talked about a lot. That repayment is resuming. So they've acknowledged that. And they also acknowledge the fact that in the short term, real estate might get hit a little bit with the increasing in the mortgage rates. But hey, they don't think that's going to be very deep. That's going to be sort of a small thing. But what they really believe is really two things. Number one, they believe that the disposable income for average Americans is looking good. And that they believe that's going to start to reaccelerate in 2024, backed by, let me give them a quote, continued solid job growth and rising real wages. They think that's going to continue through 2024. And then they strongly disagree with the majority of people and commentators and economies out there that this lag that we always talk about, that the Fed, that whenever the Fed has their interest rate hike, there's usually a lag to that, 18, 24 months. They believe that the long and variable lag is fading, and going into 2024, it's not going to be that much of an issue. In fact, they believe that the Fed has pretty much stopped hiking rates, maybe another 0.25. But overall, they've got some very, very rosy outcome on the economy. And I've been thinking about this a lot, not just from this article, but like Jay, you said, the recession's been canceled. Like everybody 6 months ago was like, oh crap, there's going to be a recession coming. The Fed was even talking about, hey, we anticipate a small recession. And now everybody's like, somehow we've gotten it out. And so, quote that I found here, the most likely outcome is that the economy will move towards a soft landing. This was Janet Yellen in October of 2007. This is what usually happens, right? Everybody remembers the Bernanke quote too, like there's no recession on the horizon. This was like in 2007, 2008. And I agree with Bloomberg. So Bloomberg has a great quote, which is, when everyone expects a soft landing, brace for impact. They are in the camp, which I think a lot of the economists are, that they still see a 60% chance of a recession. And let's face it, let's go through some of the things that I think Goldman Sachs, I didn't even mention a lot of these. We've got the unemployment issue, right? Which is the Fed, that's their number one mandate right now, is to basically get that unemployment rate higher. They seem to be failing, in their own words. They're trying to hike these rates. They're trying to get this unemployment rate higher. It's been pretty resilient, but the idea that the unemployment rate is going to be continuing at this so small increase in rate, I think that is complete nonsense. I think you're going to see a massive increase in unemployment here certainly in the next 12 months. I mean, I'm talking here in the next several weeks, let alone like there. But so unemployment, Jay, I'm sure you're going to have a lot of those things. By the way, the banking issue that was out there in March of 2023, that has not yet been resolved. Let me share a screen with you guys. Wanted to share this. Let's see here. Let's get if I can share. Can you guys see? So this is this is coming straight from the Federal Reserve, and this is the Bank Term Funding Program, and what the banks are actually currently borrowing from the Fed. I know it's kind of loading up. So if you're listening to this on the podcast, what I'm showing is the amount of money that the banks are. Can you guys see that? There it is. The amount of money that these banks are borrowing from the Fed. It's not quite a discount window, but it's basically their emergency fund when they need some cash. And this is the program that the Fed came out in March. You can see that in March, when it first came out, it got up to about $79 billion a month that they were doing back in March and April. It kind of leveled off in April and May at that sort of $80 billion a month phase. And then since then, it's kind of slowly getting crept up, and it's all the way now up to 103, 105, $108 billion now here in September of 2023. That's the amount of money that these banks are borrowing from the Fed, not because they're doing great and everything is kosher, but because they're having some issues. You guys can certainly talk about more than I can the lending standards. I think we talked about a little bit about that last week. AJ, you're in the thick of a lot of these dealings with banks, but they're clearly tightening their lending standards. The report from Bloomberg said that as of the latest reading, half of the large and mid-sized banks are imposing tougher criteria for commercial and industrial loans. And aside from the pandemic period, that's the highest since 2008 financial crisis. And Bloomberg believes that this is going to have an impact here in the fourth quarter of this year. They actually believe that the recession may already be starting to be called this year. Their call actually, and Jay, you did, I remember one of our earlier episodes, we talked about, who actually calls recessions, and that's the National Bureau of Economic Research, and they usually do it looking in the rearview mirror. So Bloomberg believes that sometime next year, they're actually going to be coming back and calling recession in this quarter of 2024, because if you look at the key numbers that they look at, which is, measures of income, unemployment, consumer spending, and factory output, they've modeled that themselves, and they say that there's a really high likelihood that we will be going into this recession here in 2024. So we've got all those issues. Yeah, go ahead.
I still think that there's this one major issue that I think the definition of recession these days is a lot harder to tease out than it has been in years past. And we talked about this a couple times in the past, about the fact that because the middle class has sort of evaporated, and we've seen such a gap between those in the higher strata of socioeconomic place and those in the lower socioeconomic strata is so wide that we can be feeling a recession and a non-recession at the same time, depending on who you are, where you live, what kind of job you have, what kind of assets you own.
Your industry.
I think we've seen this for the last year. Again, if I go out and talk to 10 people, 8 of them are going to tell me they're feeling like we're in a recession. 2 of them are going to tell me that they feel like everything's going great and they hope this continues forever. And it's not just that they have different definitions of a recession. It's that they're literally feeling different things based on again, who they are, where they work, what they do, et cetera, et cetera. And so I think it's very possible that we are in what is a prolonged recession for a lot of Americans, and potentially no recession or a very short recession for a small percentage of Americans. And so my concern is that at this point, because there's no middle class or very little middle class, we may never again, until something really fundamentally breaks and we get a big reset, we may never again come to an agreement on whether we're in a recession or not, when it comes to just the populace view.
This goes back to what we were talking about last week. It was last week when we talked about how there's such a divergence right now. When if you look at the vast majority of all Americans, they are feeling like they can't even meet ends meet. You look and poll Americans' ability to, they believe, pay their rent, groceries, to do the basics to live. And crazy, like 85% of them don't believe they can do that on a month-to-month basis today. It's the highest we've ever seen in the United States.
And hopefully they don't have student loans.
Look at it and you go, it's all this stuff going on with them. But then if you look at the asset holders, right? Ones that are like, no, we feel fine because government policy since 2008 has been to drop the dollar and increase asset prices, saving those assets. And then inflation is eroding away the dollar's value. So all of a sudden you're making the wealthy wealthy, but you're eroding the purchasing power of mainstream. And then you're saying we're not technically in a recession. To Jay's point, what does that mean then? If people can't pay their bills, if they have to work 3 jobs to live, to them.
Yeah, and that's a great point too, because this article I was reading too, they were talking about and that's one of the arguments I was going to bring up. But the savings rate of most Americans has tumbled. We've been seeing that trend go down. And one statistic that they were pointing out to was saying like 80% of the poorest Americans have less money saved up now than they did pre-COVID. So that number continues to dwindle down. And to your point, with inflation, look, I just paid $113 to fill up my Jeep, and I got the cheap gas. Granted, I'm in California, right? But it's approaching back up to like $7 a gallon in my neck of the woods. Obviously, where you guys are, it's a lot cheaper. But if you look at it year over year, month over month, gas prices are going up. Everything's starting to creep up again. And for most Americans, it's difficult to even go to the grocery store and pick up their.
These are outrageous. I got 4 kids, 2 teenagers. It seems like my wife, we were just talking about this before I left. She's like, I'm going to the store twice a week. And she's like, I don't leave the store $300. She's like, this is out of control. She's feeling it.
Yeah, and here's the thing. It's Goldman Sachs that's saying this, and
the research division is saying this.
The research division, but it's still Goldman.
Yeah, but what are they in the business of doing?
They're an investment bank, and so they're in the business of selling investments. And when do you sell investments? When the economy's good, and so it's in their best interest to want there to be no recession. I'm not saying that they're wrong on some of their analysis, or I'm sorry, I'm not saying they're wrong on their data. But the problem is we can all look at the same data and come to different conclusions. And this idea of a 15% chance of a recession, again, what's the definition of a recession? Is it going to be something that
it's 2 quarters? They're using the same. Everybody, look, in these financial publications, Goldman Sachs, Bloomberg, they're all using. They were even talking about Germany, right? And we talked about last week too about the global economy. That's not looking good. China's a mess right now. AJ did a great episode a couple episodes ago about how China's falling apart. Germany's technically in a recession. They technically have had 2 quarters with negative GP. So everybody's kind of using that definition, even though, Jay, you bring up a great point. That may not be the best, or who cares, right? Who cares?
They already had it. And they said it's not a recession.
Right.
Right. Yeah. And don't forget, by the way, guys, even though the yield, and I know, Jay, you've been texting us nonstop all week of watching this 10-year note yield go all the way up to 4.5, 4.6.
It's 4.8 right now.
4.8 right now. But even then, even at 4.8, even if it gets to 5, the yield curve is still inverted. And one of the things that typically happens that we've talked many, many times ago is that the recession generally starts when the curve uninverts. And that's kind of in the direction it's going. Now, you could argue the good news is that it's inverting kind of the right way, meaning the long end of the curve is going up versus the longer end of the shorter term going down, but it's still uninverting. And that's another sign of when the actual recession typically hits. Is when that happens. But to me, when everybody's screaming, recession's coming, recession coming, recession coming, that's probably a sign that it's probably not. And now that everybody's kind of said, hey, the recession's over, we're not going to have a recession, or it's not going to happen until 2025, that to me always indicates that something's brewing, because it's just history repeating itself.
So it's interesting. You see Goldman Sachs and all the research divisions put stuff out and how all rosy it is. And you had 3 weeks earlier the CEO saying everybody's a fool to think that we're going to ride out of this unscathed, and to say that you would be literally, I believe the words were, you would be a fool to think that this is not going to be bad, and that you would expect us to not be in real big trouble. And then 3 weeks later, they're like, yeah, everything's good. So I think it's always interesting to look at the commentators inside the bank outside when they're talking to in conventions and different things like that, and then align that up with the research team, because what they're reporting on is the numbers they're seeing versus the research team, which is doing overall analysis, which I think the best metric is always businesses. And I think it was Jay that spoke about this, where I think a few weeks ago when you said the best indicators businesses, right? Look at them. And so I always find it interesting. CEOs are saying one thing, research divisions are saying
Yeah, I'm glad
another.
you brought that up because that's why I kind of was been focusing on the research division because I have kind of a funny story about it. One of the conferences I went many years ago. Jim Rickards, a pretty well known attorney and sort of economy. He's kind of a big public figure out there. He was joking about that. This is probably 7 or 8 years ago, where he was talking to a CEO or somebody really high level in one of these investment firms, and he was saying contradictory stuff from the research department, and the executive would be, yeah, nobody listens to the research department. Like even within their company, they're like, yeah, the research department, like, no, they're out there doing their own thing, and nobody listens to them. So I thought that was interesting, and that's kind of what I thought when I was reading this and noticed it's the Goldman Sachs research department. AJ, to your point, the executives of the company are saying something else, and will be interested to know. And I don't have any insider info, but interesting what exactly their clients are buying, what they're recommending their clients. Are they recommending products that are consistent with that position or not?
Historically, CEOs' predictions of where the economy's headed has been pretty good because at the end of the day, the way CEOs act and react is going to a large degree control whether we go into a recession or not, because they're the ones that choose to spend money or not spend money. And if you look at Q2 of this year, there's a CEO survey put out by an organization called the Conference Board, and they do a bunch of consumer polls and business polls, and they're pretty well respected. In Q2, 93% of CEOs expected a recession in the next 12 to 18 months. In Q3, as of last month, it was down to 84%. So a little bit lower. I mean, there's a few more people that think we could have a soft landing, but for the most part, the vast majority of business controllers, runners, owners believe that we're still heading towards a recession. And my guess is that they're acting in that way. They're spending money in that way, and that's ultimately going to increase the chances of it happening.
That could be like a self-fulfilling prophecy too, right? Like whatever, right?
100%.
So, my thing is like the markets are so willing to panic right now, though. Like it's not going to take a lot for us to see a recession, in my opinion. That's why I said when we were doing our predictions, like we have the student loans coming online. All it's going to take is just a slow holiday season of earnings. We already saw just in the last couple of weeks a few bad, not even bad news. All of a sudden sent the 10-year way up. It sent the stock market down. Like if we have an actual bad news bears thing happen, then everyone's going to panic. And as much as the Fed says, okay, they're a dual mandate, we're just all about inflation and employment, they're also financial stability. And so if we see some issue happen where financial stability is all of a sudden at risk, their whole talking tough about how we're going to hold strong on just inflation and employment, we're going to really test that.
Well, you guys see it. We all see it. And so you guys have investors. You're on the ground. I mean, we see it from a consumer level. What's going on in our industry with like the price levels and what has changed there and moving and consumers, but also the investors. At the first of the year, I felt like investors wanted to stash cash into something that was recession resistant and more safer. But now it seems like they don't want to put cash anywhere. They're all holding on to cash. And that's been a big change in the last 6 months that I think we're seeing in a lot of the investment industry, is that capital is not wanting to be deployed. It's staying in safe bank accounts where they can get 5% interest, and they're not willing to take the risk. Whereas before, they just wanted to hedge against the risk. That's a big change for markets.
Any final thoughts there, Jay or Mauricio?
No, I mean we've beat this horse for going on 18 weeks now, and I don't think we have any real answers. But I would certainly say that over the past 18 weeks since we've been doing this show, Mauricio's held steadfast that a recession's coming and it's going to be worse than what a lot of people believe. I'm still not doom and gloom on it, but I've certainly come around to the fact that I think things are going to be worse than I thought a few months ago. And I also agree that it could happen quickly. We just don't know what that kind of catalyst will be that starts the ball rolling.
Yeah, I'm hopeful that the Fed's just talking tough, and the moment we see some instability in a big in a big way. They're just going to pivot and they're going to save us from a real horrible recession. But you can never really bank on the Fed doing what you want. So we will see. Well, we talked some collusion. Just kidding. I've used the word collusion a lot more than normal now that I'm a manager of two fantasy.
It sounds so great in your Canadian accent. Collusion.
But no, we're talking about rent pricing software is what we got coming up next. And the reason I said collusion is that's one of the things that some of these senators threw out. So as technology has gotten cheaper, dynamic rent pricing has become more accessible to the average investor to the point where you basically have to use it if you have something like an Airbnb these days. But dynamic rent pricing has been around for a while in commercial real estate. And after these crazy rent increases that we saw in multifamily during the pandemic, a bunch of senators decided that it was the fault of these dynamic rent pricing models. And it kind of it got sent to the Department of Justice. And then it kind of was brought to the forefront of everyone's like, what's going on here? So AJ, I'm sure you use dynamic pricing in storage. And so are you seeing the same thing where it's helping you really raise these rents to high levels, or is it kind of working in an opposite effect?
And maybe start by telling us what these things are, because I've only learned recently.
Yeah, so there's large software programs that are doing analysis in real time on market availability, rents, and basically seeing where they can price and drive rents to. So a lot of people are familiar with airlines doing this. It's the main one where you know that everybody on that plane is paying a different price. So if you're sitting in a middle aisle, the two people in a middle seat, the two people next to you paid a different price. One could have paid twice what you did, and the other one could have paid half or less of what you did. And you really don't know. And that's actually the only way the airlines can make money. If it wasn't for that, airlines would all be bankrupt. They almost were. And when you look at this overall dynamic pricing, it's mainly driven by large software scrubbing that's taking in real market prices. So I own a software company, and I actually have started another software company that does revenue management, and we're tying those things into each other. And what has happened, even with like our software company, and what you're seeing is these are extremely powerful tools. But even like Kyle said, Airbnb uses this. I mean, funny enough, guess who else uses this? Pumpkin patches. I'm not even kidding. Pumpkin patches. Like you go to the pumpkin patch with the kids. So this is a very now common thing that takes place. And in lots of times, a lot of these industries, they cannot survive without it. I know storage is basically that way. In today's market, if you are not doing high level revenue management, you're in trouble. And that's also why we see price fluctuations like discounts. So you get discounts on airlines because of dynamic pricing. If you didn't, no one could ever discount rates because you would have nowhere to make up for it. So there's bad, but there's also good. So in storage, we can give discounts that are huge, right? Now, the lawsuits that are going on, I have two things. I've got some basic information on that. Then I had our in-house attorney give his thoughts on exactly what's been filed and what's going on there. The first thing is to understand the software companies that are really targeted here. They're looking at like you're talking about YieldStar or RealPage, and this was filed in. I mean, we're a year into this? Wasn't this October 22nd when this was filed? And this has been it's a class action lawsuit. That's what's going on. So it's against the software companies, but it's also against landlords. So that's how they got it qualified as class action. And they are suing for price fixing, which really comes down to what Kyle was talking about, collusion, meaning that they're all working together, which that's technically against the law, right? So you can't have all the stores in an area say, hey, let's all rise prices together, right? That would be against the law. So when they do that, they don't make it public that they're doing it, and they do it behind closed doors. And then they all do it. So if they get caught, it's really bad. But that's how it works. So what they're saying is because of the software, the landlords that are all using that software are in unison rising rents and prices. So it is collusion. Now, when you look at kind of our attorney's feedback and what he was looking at and see, the big question that you got to answer the use of the software to analyze market pricing, right? He looks at it and said, does that defy trade practices? So is that an unfair trade practice? Is it all of them working together? It looks like this is going to not go through. Basically, as it sits today, it looks like that is not true. And two, I think one of the reasons they look at it is this would open the door to basically every single industry that's doing this. So if you go after them for this and say that's collusion, every single industry that is using software to manage rates and prices is now in collusion.
And that includes the hotels too. I mean, I think you mentioned Airbnb. I don't know if you mentioned hotels, but hotels rely on dynamic pricing all the time. That's why you can get a better room. I'm sure Jay and I paid different room rates here for the same hotel when we're staying
I think
in
the
Dallas.
difference in this though was the data though. So the thing is, as you pointed out, RealPage owns YieldStar, so it's their software, and so RealPage takes in data from all these different users. So, all these different apartments or whoever's using these things, they take the real-time data in from those actual people and put it into their software, and they use that to do the pricing. The difference is so they're taking data from individual people and giving it to other individual people, which is where the whole collusion thing comes from, is that inadvertently individual people are getting together to set the price. And these other things, it's not taking it from like individual users. It's taking data from, either public data or, apartments.com or stuff or whatever. It's taking data from there to set these prices. So that's kind of the difference that I see where the collusion is. It's individual users' data.
And there's intent, right? There's an intent part of it too in the collusion, right? They're intentionally trying to scheme something up, allegedly.
But most don't. So hotels, that's actually the opposite. It is the users that give the hotels. So hotels are a perfect example of collusion. So hotels every single night give their data all together, and then they actually file. So they have software that every single night you can see what everybody's prices are doing and you can set prices. So it's actually user data. That's how storage works. That's how all these companies work. You're pulling the individual landowner's data and then you're tying it all together to make prices. So there's some software that does like rate pricing and management, which is just market scrubs that is taking it from online websites, right? But most of them are the individual users that are putting in the data. So it's still individual landlords and individual users that are using it. So the Airbnb knows how to price because the Airbnb on its platform, it's pulling its individual data. Technically, that does mean then they can all lift prices because then they know they can, right? But then they also can discount prices. So that data usage is twofold. First of all, you have internal revenue and external price setting. Internal revenue management is also included. You include it internal, then you benchmark it from external scrubbing, but that's not ever really taken in the other users. So when I do revenue management or a hotel does, they're not pulling in other users' data. But rate setting, they do. Two totally different things, but the lawsuit is on price setting. So it's on the rate that you go to get, and they're charging higher prices. So that's where the problem comes in.
Well, and I think they put a bit of a bullseye on their back too when they were doing like I think it was their investors yearly retreat or whatever it was. Then the guy, it was right after we'd seen like the double-digit rent increases, and he went up and bragged. And I have to put the quote up here, and he says, "I think we're what's driving it. Quite honestly, as property manager, very few of us would be willing to actually raise rents double digits within a single month by doing it manually." So he's saying that because of YieldStar, YieldStar was actually able to allow people to say, "Hey, look, you can raise your rents 15% right here, 25% right here." That actually made landlords do it when they wouldn't have done it, historically.
But that's just getting market information, though. That's just getting real time market information. I mean, I don't know why if the market can bear, it's not like there's two different things. One is to artificially everybody get together, like to this point, collude and say, "Hey, look, the market only allows $1,000 a month in rent, but if we all get together, we can do $1,200." versus, hey, I just have access to all the market data and the market is telling me that I can raise rents to $1,000. Those are two different things, right? I have no issue with the latter.
But if the people who are using YieldStar are just, drones listening to a machine, and that machine is colluding with other machines, isn't it the same thing? Like, let's bring this down.
That's sharing data. If you're sharing data so that you can get real
Then what's
time,
the definition of colluding? And then I'm going up to AJ and I'm saying, hey, we both have. Let's take an extreme example. We're in a small town. We each own 5 self-storage units, and they're the only 10 self-storage units in the area. And I go to AJ and say, hey, what's your price? And AJ says, oh, it's this, and I'm 98% occupied. And I say, oh, mine's this, and mine's 98% occupied. And then I say, oh, well, we can raise rents then. And you say, yeah, we can raise rents then. Is that not colluding? Because that's what YieldStar is doing.
But you didn't have to say, but what if you just raised your rents based on that realization that you were both at the same rent and 98% occupied, and he did the same thing? You didn't have a discussion.
But the reason that realization's happening is because of the YieldStar software. The YieldStar software is making properties talk to each other and deciding between the properties what those rents should be.
Yeah, but if it's a market discovery, then I can undercut. Like if AJ says, "Hey, I'm going to take advantage of this and charge 1,000," and I can go, "Well, I'm going to charge $9.99 or I'm going to charge $9.95 because I've got the same data he has, and I'm going to price it just underneath it." And then AJ is going to come down and price it just beneath me, and then finally we're going to just go all the way down to what the market rate is. Collusion is something
once again.
completely
Let's
different.
take it to an extreme example. Apartments. We have 10 apartments in one city. It's the only 10 apartments in that one city. They're all using YieldStar. YieldStar. There's only so many people who can rent, and they have to rent. YieldStar, based on the way their software is working, if they had that market share, they would just keep pushing the rent. It would just keep going up, and people would just have to keep taking it because they have no other option.
What? But what? Only if you're colluding, though. Only if you're colluding, because if you're not colluding and you raise your rent,
that's like old age colluding. That's saying it has to be two human beings colluding with each other. Just because it's a piece of software that's actually doing it on your behalf doesn't change what it's doing.
No, here, let me give you the difference. So think about this. Think about you're sitting there, Kyle, right? And by the way, too, Kyle, this is really good that you be the devil's advocate here, because this is something we actually really do need to talk about, explore, because it's kind of weird and fuzzy. But how it's basically set up is you own an apartment building, I own an apartment building, Jay and Mauricio own apartment buildings in a city. Now, we have a business consultant that puts out a report, a market research report, and the market research report says everybody is full. And then we all decide from that report, which he gathered from all of us, which that's business, and then we all decide independently to raise prices. That's totally fine.
That's fine. That's not how YieldStar works. YieldStar, we've used it, or we tried. We don't use it anymore because it's too difficult. But YieldStar, we looked at YieldStar, and basically you got to reset it every morning. And in the morning, it says it has their own proprietary algorithm that they, you can't see behind the hood. But basically, they say this is what your rent should be on this unit. This is what your rent should be on this unit, and this is what your rent should be on this unit. And what they do is they have all of their data from all of their other users, and they can determine, okay, these people are fully occupied at this rent. These people are not occupied at this rent. We can price the rent at this. But what I'm saying is, if by doing that, if they had all of the market share, then they would raise the rent and raise the rent and raise the rent and would never hit a ceiling because everyone would stay fully occupied. And that, just because it's software that's doing it and it's not a bunch of users getting together and actually doing it, that's collusion. That's exactly what collusion is.
No, it's not. So if you go back to the example, if I have a report and I give it to all 4 of us, and I say, I think that this market can actually withstand a 20% increase in rates, and we all go do it, that is perfectly legal. 100% legal. If we all got in a room,
but you guys are deciding on that. That's you're not just in the case of YieldStar, it's saying this is what your rent's going to be, and that's what people do.
But that's what people do, but it's not forced. You're making a decision to follow it or not, predicated on market data.
They have over 90% adoption, where when they say this is the rent, then over 90% of people just take that rent.
I think at the end of the day, it boils down to what's going on at the algorithm level. Is the goal of the algorithm to drive rents up above what would otherwise be the price discovered market rent?
It's not the goal, but if the goal their stated goal is to maximize the rents.
No, no. The goal is to make it the most efficient marketplace possible. If you don't have that software, then you have a more inefficient marketplace. That's all that's happening. We're just having a tool that allows you real time to know exactly what the market rate is, assuming nobody's colluding. Again, I think we're all in agreement that if the 4 of us or the 100 of us all got together and said, "Okay, AJ, you go up another 10%, and I'll go up 10%, and then AJ, we all get together and do it 8%," then fine, that's collusion. But if I'm just taking that data and I just know what the market rate is, the real time, that's just price discovery, and that's just I don't have a problem.
But you're not taking it. That's the point.
Well, and two, do you know how hard that is to prove? Do you know how hard that is to even prove that we colluded? To say that people don't know what's going on with their competitors and don't act accordingly. In fact, collusion, you actually need like an explicit agreement. Like it has to be us. To say you can colluded because I know that all three of you raised prices, so I did. That means you could say it was collusion on every single market on earth, that I knew what my competitors were doing.
But you keep saying that the point is that YieldStar is doing this on your behalf. YieldStar is colluding. So we have YieldStar AJ, we have YieldStar J, and we have YieldStar Mauricio. Those all the different properties. They're the ones setting the prices, and they collude with each other. They literally talk to each other and say, "Oh, what are you doing? Oh, I'm going to do this. What are you doing? I'm going to do this. What are you going to do?" And then actual J, actual Mauricio, and actual AJ just take what YieldStar does and put it in. So what's the difference?
If we use the consultant, it's not colluding. If we all have a consultant that gives us price.
But if you all had the same consultant that went and talked to all of you and then gave you all the same advice, would that not be colluding?
No, it's not colluding. A consultant can work with all the competitors in the market and give price guidance, and we can accept it.
Let me tell you what's really going on. So let me give you the anti-lawyer analysis of this whole thing. And I'm going to get a lot of hate from my colleagues, but this whole class action, AJ said the key word there was class action. The class action whole thing is there's a whole industry of law firms and lawyers that are actively looking for things to go sue, whether people are really complaining or not, because the only people that really win in class action lawsuits are the attorneys, because they get these multi-million dollar awards. They get to take a third or 25%, and then the little guy gets $25.50 or a free, chicken nuggets at McDonald's, and the lawyers pick up millions and millions and millions of fees. So that's really what's going on. It's all about the contingency fee, and because it allows the plaintiffs in the class action not to have to pay a penny. In fact, most of these guys don't even know. How many of you guys have received that notice, from AT&T or from Sprint or whatever, that if you had this between this year and that year, you're entitled to $53.40. That's what you're going to end up getting. But it's the lawyers that actually, and I know that's not a popular opinion, but sorry, guys.
Well, and two, it also goes both ways, though, Mauricio, meaning that the software actually drives down rates. So if there is vacancy in the market, the software is actually undercutting each other to try to price that to get occupancy risen. So it goes both ways. It's not like we're colluding saying, do not lower prices. That's not how it works. In fact, if there's vacancy, it tries to make it competitive and drives down rates.
That's why we didn't use it. Like it was too difficult for us. Like, first of all, if you ever see a C class, even a low B class using YieldStar, then I would take a good look at that, because it is very difficult to really work the system the way it's supposed to be worked. And if you have a C class property and you have C class property managers, then they're not going to be very well adept at it, and they're probably doing it wrong. Not all of them, but there's a good chance they're doing it wrong, because you literally have to train them on the whole YieldStar system. You got to check it every morning. And like, I've seen properties when we look at it and we're like, what's going on with these financials? And they're like, oh, it's a YieldStar property, because they will literally one morning, they'll drop their rents by $300. And we're like, why? Like, okay, just because of that one overnight, there was a bunch of things happened. All of a sudden they dropped the rents $300, and they just took tenants in that. Like, one day it was 1,100, then it was 800. So like, you really have to make sure you know what you're doing. You see it in super competitive markets, A-class markets and stuff, that it works very well. But to me, like, it should come down to market share too. Like, are we really caring about whether or not this is collusion if they have a 5% market share of what's going on? You read these articles and they say they name some small town in Washington State by Seattle or something they have 70% market share. But in our markets that we've seen, like, it's a very small amount. There'll be pockets that are very yield star driven, but it's not a big enough that we could really say that this is moving the needle enough that senators should be involved.
And I agree. And I think if you look at the actual if you have a market that has over 90% share, that's anti-competitiveness. I think that's a whole nother issue where everybody's now resilient on it. And if you look at these softwares, which are getting crazy complex now, but one of the things that it does, it has the adverse effect. So you guys got to check out my YouTube video where I walk through what's happening in our industry on the software, because it's shocking what had happened, where we saw rates dive 60+% all in unison. And the reason being was the software was playing catch, and it started to drive everybody's rates down, and you just had things like falling like crazy. Well, that happens too. So it goes both ways. And that's one of the big things is the software. When you say colluding, we're saying we're not going to drop prices, we're only going to rent them. But the software does both. It goes up and down, it lowers prices, it increases prices, predicated on market data. That's a really sucky collusion if one person drops its rate 60% and everybody else starts doing that.
Sure. I'm not saying that I think they're going to win. I don't think they're going to win on this. But it is a bit telling, though. If you look at RealPage, they literally, so you brought up the airlines back in the 80s. Like, first of all, how far behind are we as a real estate industry that it took us this long when the airlines have been doing this since the 80s? But back in the 80s, that's when they started doing with the airlines. And in 1992, they actually had to settle with the Department of Justice because of this, because of, collusion and all of that stuff. And not only that, so the guy was head of, I think it was Alaskan Airlines revenue driving management system. So he was part of that collusion settlement. That's the guy that they hired to head the RealPage yield star, the guy who went through the collusion settlement with the airline. So I thought that was optics wise. I don't.
Yeah, and Kyle, don't forget that you mentioned you don't think they're going to win. That may not be the objective, right? A lot of these are just like, hey, let's just get this thing going. Let's have a legitimate claim and let's just settle. Because a lot of times it's just easy to get the settlement and guess who wins.
I was saying I can't speak from a legal standpoint. I'm not an attorney. I don't know what collusion means. I don't know what the legal threshold is for collusion. So don't take this as a legal argument. But a big distinction I see is that when we talk about doing everything in our power to optimize our revenue, that's capitalism. I think where we get into an issue is when we are willing to help our competitors optimize their revenue in order for us to optimize our revenue. And that's where it feels like we're moving into the collusion territory. And so when you look at the goal of YieldStar, RealPage, any of these tools, at the end of the day, it feels like we are basically making that concession. We are willing to help our competitors drive their top line as high as possible to the benefit of us driving our top line higher.
So you just let me got two on one there by Mauricio and AJ for like 10 minutes and didn't say a word. I've been
trying. So number one, I've been sitting here. I've never really thought about this. So I have been sitting here for the last 10 minutes thinking about, like, where do I stand on this? Because I hadn't really thought about it. I didn't want to be rash. Number two, I've tried jumping in like 7 times and you guys keep cutting me off.
So just from a legal, now every state's going to have a different collusion definition, but from a legal standpoint, there is an element of fraud, which is an intentional act. So it is, it's usually secret, but the key here is that you're having two parties that are trying to defraud and gain an unfair advantage, over third parties. So there is an intentional element to this. I don't call it crime, but this violation, and sometimes it can raise the level of crime. We're not talking about crime here, but we're talking about, there isn't an intentional act. So just having a price discovery and here's the information, here's the data, that wouldn't rise to the level of collusion. It's got to literally be, AJ, buddy, what do you think that if we
I don't, correct me if I'm wrong, but it doesn't seem that like individual users of YieldStar are really at risk here because there is no intent, but maybe YieldStar is itself. But anyway.
Yeah, and that's the thing I think to kind of end on is exactly that, Kyle, and the kind of what the framework that my in-house attorney kind of put down. You said, well, accidental collusion via algorithms, doesn't look like it fits into definition of collusion. It presents new challenges that that regulators need to address. And he said the big legal implications that he sees is a restructuring or new regulatory framework that takes into account these things that the old one does not. And that's where, I'm actually a big, I'm very concerned about this in my industry, and I put a whole lot of information out what software is doing because I think it's inviting regulation in that doesn't exist, and I think it's really scary because if we lose our ability to be price competitive due to software systems and this algorithm collusion that we're talking about for all intents and purposes, that can have unwanted effects on our business as they try to control these things. And I think that's the real risk. I don't think this will pass, but I think it can open up new regulatory frameworks in which they try to encompass things like that. And that's an area that we don't understand or know and can, especially my industry, which is really unregulated, we don't want.
Yeah,
So
just wait till we get AI doing this for us too. That's
that was the point I was about to make. Yeah.
yeah. So anyway, we got to move on, and we got to get our clicks on this podcast. So we got to get our click count up. So Donald Trump, let's talk about him.
Oh, wait, I thought Jay's about to speak. I thought our numbers are going to start tanking from this point forward. Everything starts tanking when Jay starts speaking. But no, you're right. Trump is going to be a good clickbait.
Yeah, at least we could put Trump in the title that we talked about him. But no, it is kind of relevant to our podcast because his latest legal issues are real estate related. So what's going on is he's in the middle of a civil fraud case surrounding his real estate holdings, where the issue is his appraisals on his properties and how this affects his ability to get things like loans, his insurance rates, his taxes, things like that. So, Jay, why don't you try and keep this non-political, but just break down real estate wise what's going on with Donald Trump?
Yeah, I thought this was a fun topic, and I'm not at all trying to make this political, but it's interesting from a real estate perspective. So basically, what we're talking about here is there is a fraud trial going on, a civil fraud trial with Donald Trump, and the claim that the government is making is that between 2011, 2021, I think, he overinflated the value of his properties in order to get loans. A lot of details here. Again, I'm not an attorney, so I'm not trying to make a legal case here. But again, the real estate part is interesting. So one of the points of contention is his Mar-a-Lago property in Palm Beach, Florida. And so Mar-a-Lago is this property that it's about, I've read 17 acres and 20 acres, somewhere between 17 and 20 acres. It's got a big mansion on it. It was built back in the 20s, and this mansion has 126 rooms. It has like tennis courts, and basically it's a gorgeous resort in Palm Beach, Florida. Trump bought it in '85 for $10 million. And so the judge in the case basically says, or Trump, let's start with Trump. Trump back in 2011 said this property was worth somewhere in the $420 to $650 million range is what he was claiming on some valuations that he was doing for some lenders as collateral. And so government is saying, nope, that value is way too high. And so a judge a few days ago basically looked and said, yeah, this property based on the tax assessment of the property is somewhere in the $18 to $27 million range because that's what the tax assessment was. And so Trump came out today actually and said, not only is that ridiculous, the property is worth 50 to 100 times that. So basically we have these numbers. So a judge saying that the property is worth $17 to $27 million or $18 to $27 million based on tax assessment. Trump saying it was worth $420 to $650 million on some valuations between 2011 2021, and Trump today saying the property is worth 1.5 to $2 billion. Now, I think we can all agree that tax assessments are absolutely ridiculous. Nobody really values their property based on tax assessments. And I'm very happy to say that my house is worth X, even though the tax assessment on my house is worth half of X. At the same time, I think Trump saying that this is the most valuable piece of property in the country, worth $1 to $2 billion, is also probably kind of ridiculous. It's again 20 acres at most, and so the stuff around it is selling land value for somewhere in the $6 million range. So what is this property worth? And that's the discussion I want to have. And I don't know if you guys have done any research, but if I were brought in to kind of do a valuation of this particular property, first thing I would do is I would say, what's the stuff around it selling for? But here's the thing. This is a deed restricted piece of property. This property is not allowed to be used as a personal residence. It has to be used as a club or a resort. Nobody can technically live there, even though the former president actually does live there. I don't know how he's getting around that, but whatever. So using comps is actually probably not the right way to do this. We can say that vacant land, there was a parcel that I looked at right next to his that was about a half acre that went for about $6 million. So if you could comp it as a residential property, you're probably looking at 12 million an acre times 17 to 20 acres, somewhere in the $200 to $250 million range. But again, it can't be used as a personal residence. So from my perspective, we need to value it as a business. And if you look at it from a business standpoint, there's kind of multiple things that you have to take into account. One, there's the land value, there's the improvement value of the buildings that are on there. So how much would it cost to rebuild it, or what's the land and the buildings worth? Then there's the business value. How much revenue is the business generating? And then applying a multiple to that, because businesses are worth some multiple of the revenue they generate. And so based on that, how much is this property worth? Well, if the tax assessor is saying the property is worth, let's say 27 million on the high side, I know in my area, which is a couple hours from this place, tax assessments are about half of what my property is worth. This is my personal residence. So let's say that's actually worth double that based on the tax assessment. There's 50 million there. The property generated about 30 million in revenue, or 33 million in revenue on average. I'm sorry, 24 million in revenue on average, like between 2016 and 2021. So you assume a typical margin on a resort property is somewhere between 10 and 40%. Let's go on the high end there. So 40% of 24 million is somewhere around $10 million of profit per year. Apply a multiple of 2 or 3 times, which is typical for a resort hotel. And now the business is worth somewhere in the $20 to $30 million range. So you have a $50 million property with $20 to $30 million in business valuation. That's $80 million.
Well, you can't do both though. You got to pick one or the other. You can't.
Of course you can. I buy a business. I can buy a business.
So when I'm selling an apartment, I can say, okay, it makes $1 million a year plus the land is worth. So I put a cap rate multiple on $1 million. It's worth 20 million. And then, but the land's also worth 5 million. So it's worth 25.
The land and the property is the business there. Let's say you buy a plumbing company. If you buy a plumbing company, the value of that plumbing company is going to be the same.
But it's not tied to a piece of land. You could do it wherever we want. This particular property is tied to the piece of land. You got to pick one or the other. You either got to say, okay, it's the value of the land or it's the value of the business.
Nope, we do this in storage. So we have storage facilities. We offer all sorts of different things within it. And there's always been an argument that it's valued on net income. But when I buy properties, I actually pull out some of those things and I pay a multiple on them. And then I pay the rest on a cap rate. So I will not pay moving, like they have a service for the storage facility company. You can use a moving truck or whatever, all that stuff. And I pull that out, and I will not pay for that because it's leveraged as if it's real estate income, and it's
right.
not.
But if the business cannot operate without the piece of land, the land is tied to that business and is part of that business. You can't separate the two and then add them back together. It is like it's just one business. You either say, okay, there's 3 ways to basically evaluate this, and the 2 that you hit on was, 1, what's the land value? What's just the value of the land right there? Or 2, how much money it makes based on an income? You can't put the 2 of them together.
Well, I do. So I think you can, as long as the buyers are willing to.
I mean, the only thing I would say is, okay, you're putting value on land that maybe is buildable, that you can add to, but assuming that you can't, then like, of course, like if we go to buy an apartment and it's got more land than what the actual business needs, then yeah, we're going to give more money for that actual land. But you can't price in the land under the actual business that is required for the business to run, separate from what the business like value is.
I can't argue with you. I can't. No, you bring up a good point, and
I still don't agree with that. Why? I don't understand why you can't.
Well, think of an apartment complex. How do we value an apartment complex?
But that's a single source revenue.
Right. So, well, Mar-a-Lago more or less is single source. Yes, it has all these. It'll have all these other side things. But
I think I for the most part would agree with you, Kyle. Yeah, because you can't separate the business from the land. If you were to move the business somewhere else, the business would generate $0.
Well, and don't forget that there's a Trump. Wait, don't forget. And I'm not, again, not a political thing, but Trump has a brand, right? So if that's called Trump, if it was the Kyle Wilson logo, nobody would give a shit, right? It would lose half of its value if it was the Kyle Wilson value, right?
And this is where I was going next. Is that's kind of the
Mauricio. I could do a good job.
I'm sorry, 80% would go down if it was a Kyle Wilson or the AJ logo or the J logo. I like that J logo.
And this is where it gets interesting. Obviously, as a business, the property is worth a hell of a lot more because of the Trump brand. There are a lot of people, I have to imagine, that visit, whether it be heads of state or just local people that join the club, that do it because, hey, I get to hang out with Donald Trump, or I get to see Melania, or I get to say that I hang out at Mar-a-Lago. But then the question becomes, as a piece of collateral for a loan, collateral for a loan is only valuable if the lender can take it and sell it off. What's the value to a lender if they have to foreclose on this property because the loan's not paid and they have to sell it off? Do they get the value of that brand in the collateral?
Well, that's the tricky thing with this too, right? Because doesn't he own it outright?
He has $33 million of debt on it, but he's obviously done a lot of improvements.
Well, and this is the thing, is that you can carve it out. So even in hotels, when you're looking at different things, you can carve out brands, and the brand actually has value. We do that. I know lots of people do that, and they place it over. So it's I think that it's not a single source value. I actually think that hurts Trump, though. A single source value is better. Because if I'm pulling out lines of income and applying it to a multiple, it's not on a cap rate. And it's way better if it's on a cap rate, right? So if I'm getting 2x versus a 7 cap, that sucks.
In a lot of cases, brand, when you talk about hotel and having brand value, that brand can transfer with the deed. So, I mean, if I own a Hilton hotel, and a company, a lender takes it back and sells it off because I don't pay my loan or I don't pay my mortgage, they can transfer that Hilton brand with the hotel. Does the Trump brand convey?
It probably would, because the same as Hilton, like he would get licensing fees and it's a franchise fees and all of these things. He probably he's a pretty shrewd business person.
But would it be worth the same if Donald Trump wasn't hanging out there every day?
I don't know. One of the problems, though, too, I think you have with value, and especially with these things, but by the way, I think it was vastly overvalued. I think, though, what people are saying, where you have a bunch of people going after Trump, it's just Trump, so they're going to go after and say it's worth nothing because it's Trump, right? But I think he vastly overvalued it. But still, if you look at it 2 years ago compared to today, that's a totally different value. I mean, I could literally argue that some of this stuff has lost half its value in a year. If you look at even like my portfolio, what it was
in
worth,
Florida, no, stuff in Florida has doubled in the last couple of years.
But I mean, if I'm buying it and you have a high interest rate, I mean, I see prices in Florida. If I'm buying commercial real estate, it depends on where it's at. But and you're right, I guess if it's oceanfront, it's not going to budge much. But what I'm saying though is markets change, and they, especially in real estate, and values can change a lot. And one of the problems when you have specialty type assets like this, it's not like housing. This isn't like storage. This isn't like apartments. It's not like it's simply traded. I mean, you may have a handful of buyers, and that's it. and they will price the market. And so I think it's too, even like we put, a lot of people are trying to really simplify this and just say, well, and like you can read in all the news, the assessor says it's worth or it's appraised at 23 million. And so that means he overvalued it, like the newspaper saying, at 2,300, or even a judge said, times. And you're like, that's not how this works. But that's what a judge is saying, that he overvalued it by 2,300 times because an appraisal said it was worth 23 million. That's ludicrous.
And I know, Jay, I mean, I know you wanted to the whole point of this discussion was more to like, it was kind of an interesting discussion about, how do you value property? Like everybody and their mother was coming out in social media, about, they suddenly all became experts in valuations. And, at the end of the day, this is all, look, the four of us can't agree. I mean, there's always opinions, right? I could argue all day long that you should do it on a cap rate, or maybe it's a multiple of EBITDA. Maybe you take all of those and figure out. But at some point, somebody who has had their business valuated, I mean, you literally hire an expert to determine the value. But just going from the legal standpoint, what kind of ticks me off, and again, I hate, it's almost like it's not like I'm defending Trump because I'm not a huge Trump fan, but I'm defending the principle. And that, number one, is we're talking about really sophisticated parties. We're not talking about Trump trying to talk to some mom and pop person on the street and trying to get him to spend $10,000 on a product. These are like financial institutions, and so they have the option to have their own appraisal going. I'm pretty sure, and I think you mentioned this, and I have not been following the story, but I know that it's not just Donald Trump saying, "Oh, this thing's worth $10,000. This thing's worth X," and the bank saying, "Okay." It's there. He's getting a professional opinion. He's getting an appraisal, and then if the bank chooses to believe whatever other valuation, that they're sophisticated parties. These are not like freaking unsophisticated mom and pop. These are institute. This is like Goldman Sachs that we just talked about on the first segment. These are sophisticated players. We should not be protecting the little guy, right?
Here's the thing that's tricky about this one is because, and the reason I brought up that I thought Mar-A-Lago was owned outright and it didn't have any debt. He might have some small debt on it. If you're applying for a loan for this, then yes, a bank's going to do a ton of due diligence and come up with a full appraisal. They're going to do it 18 different ways. They're going to come all of this. But the way he's using it, he's not using it to get a loan on this property. He's using it to say, hey, this is my collateral that for my net worth and for liquidity and for all these different things, for applying for loans that have nothing to do with Mar-A-Lago, and for getting, insurance rates by bundling together and things like that. So yes, of course, they're big players. They're going to do some sort of due diligence as far as appraisals, but I'm sure what's getting them is that you use different values for different purposes, right? We already, like, everybody knows there's basically 3 different times that you're trying to prove value. And the first one is taxes, and everyone's going to try and prove as low at taxes as they can. They want to pay as small property taxes as they can. So they're going to use probably comparables. They're going to find a comparable that's the lowest value comparable and say, hey, look, we should be paying the same taxes for them. So that's the value for that one. When they want to, once again, sell a property, they're going to try and get the value as high as they can. So they're going to make all the income look as good as they can. And then you're going to have your own kind of internal books where, CapEx is a big thing where you're doing improvements on the property. So it's not technically an expense. So you don't really count it as far as what your income is for the value. And there's all these different ways. And it's kind of just accepted in the real estate space that you do all these things. I think where Trump's getting into trouble is just the vast number he's throwing out there. Like Forbes did their own independent appraisal of his properties, and I think it came out to 325 million with Mar-A-Lago, which seems more reasonable to me. And apparently they had access to all of his financials for the property and all that stuff, and they consulted real estate experts and they did this whole big thing on it. And that seems more reasonable to me versus, to your point, the other two extremes both seem completely unreasonable. But it's not unheard of for people to try and get different values for different purposes.
Yeah, and Jay, who's the one who originally brought the claim? Is it the Attorney General, or is it one of the banks?
It's the Attorney General.
Yeah, so that's the main. I'm like, geez, this is really what drives me nuts. I'm like, again, if one of the lending institutions who lent Trump money had an issue with the valuation and said, look, all of these contracts have reps and warranties, right? You're representing and you're warranting certain things, and they believe that you overstated or you lied or you committed fraud, then the bank has a cause of action against Trump. And if they want to go battle that in court, knock yourself out, no problem. But when the government or some regulatory agency inserts themselves into the process, you have two super sophisticated parties. It's not like we're talking about Trump and Jay Scott. the most unsophisticated person on the world. We're talking about two really sophisticated people out there where they're big boys and big girls. They can handle each other out. If they wanted to go get their own appraisal.
Yeah, like this isn't the SEC protecting individual investors or anything. This is like,
and I completely, I look, I'm no fan of Donald Trump, but I completely agree with you. In this case, this was, as you said, two sophisticated parties. They did a transaction. Everybody was happy. He never missed a loan payment. He's paid everything back. I mean, nobody's complaining again, except the government.
he does have a history of playing that game too, though, where he does everything he can and then strategically forecloses on his property.
Yeah, but again, at that point, let the banks like pursue him for fraud, and that can be a criminal charge. I mean, I think the funny thing is, I mean, if they really want to get him, apparently his penthouse in New York where he lived forever, he claimed it was 3 times the square footage that it actually is. I think that's going to hurt him as much as the revaluing Mar-A-Lago. I mean, you can say Mar-A-Lago, yeah, I really thought it was worth more because of the brand. It's hard to argue that your penthouse is 3 times the square footage when you're a real estate developer and you should be pretty good. You lived there for 30 years. You should know like the size of your property.
Maybe he's got one of those new age New York moving walls and things like that to maximize the space.
But I agree, and I think this is. I mean, I don't know if this is standard for the Attorney General to go after people for things like this, but I don't think the government should be. Again, two sophisticated parties that can, if they have an issue with it, let them sue, let them pursue fraud charges, criminal fraud charges. But this just seems like an overstep.
Yeah, and that's what ticks me off, because I'm not a huge Trump supporter at all.
You guys keep saying that, so does that mean I have to say I am a Trump supporter just to even the podcast out?
No. We have AJ. AJ's not here, but I'm sure we can say it on his behalf.
That's what I mean. AJ's gone, so I got to step in.
I feel like I'm put in a corner where and I think this happens for a lot of people where they don't necessarily like him or maybe they're neutral, but then they're forced to defend him, even though we not necessarily want to or don't want to, but we have to defend him because, like, from a principle standpoint and from a value standpoint, this just seems so ridiculous that it just kind of ticks us off. And then the other thing that went ahead, Jay, I don't think you talked about it, but on the judge, not only did he, or I forget if it's a he or she, but not only did the judge rule that he committed fraud or so agreed with the attorney general, but then they're basically banning him from doing business in New York. So in addition to all this, they're interfering with his ability to conduct business. And like, there's literally discussion as to what is he going to do with all these hotels that he owns? He has no control.
I tried so hard to make this not about politics and not about the law. I just wanted it to be about real estate. I was trying to have fun.
I know you were. And it was funny because we saw all this. I mean, if you just look at social media, everybody's saying, oh, this is how you evaluate it. And again, like, everybody suddenly became a valuation expert. And I think that was the gist of it when you suggested the topic. You wanted to talk about more the fun of how do you really value a unique property like a Mar-A-Lago, because some of it you can figure out. I mean, Trump has branded hotels, branded casinos, so we know what the excess value is. A lot of these hotels, people don't realize that they're not really owned by Trump. He just licenses his name. So you can just look at the delta. How much? It's like McDonald's.
And a lot of them he owns a percentage too. It's like he doesn't own them all.
Yeah, but it's like McDonald's. McDonald's are just independent restaurant owners that happen to use the McDonald's brand, and they pay a premium for that. So if Mauricio opened a restaurant down the street, he would be able to get $5 for the hamburger, and because I've got McDonald's, I get to charge $7.
Chilean sea bass.
Chilean sea bass, right?
All right, let's wrap this up with. It's not going to be a top 10, but it's right along the same lines of what we've been talking about. I'm going to go the top 3, and it's Trump's real estate holdings. And so I want you to guess between his resorts, his New York City properties, and his non-New York properties, which of those 3 do you think his highest concentration is? Like, rank them.
I'm going to go with non-U.S. properties because he's got so much. He's got golf courses in Scotland. He's got stuff in China.
Well, no, so golf courses so it's something like Mar-a-Lago is a resort, so that's considered a resort.
Yeah, but he's got golf courses all over the world, and I know he's got a lot of stuff in China.
So you're referring to the golf courses as parts of his resorts?
Golf courses are resorts.
Okay. So what were the 3 again?
So we got resorts, New York City properties, and non-New York properties.
I'm going to go with resorts, non-New York properties, New York properties.
Mauricio?
I'm going to go with non-New York properties, resorts, and New York properties.
So you're Both almost there. You got one wrong though. So it's the highest is actually resorts. Second is New York City properties. And then third is non-New York properties. And surprisingly, and so this is all, once again, this was done by Forbes. They did independent appraisals of all of his properties. And it came out very close though, actually, for resorts and New York City properties. So apparently he has 730 million worth in resort properties. And so that included Mar-a-Lago at 325 million. And but then once again, some of them he has debt on, and some of them he doesn't own completely outright. He has percentage. But just an example of another big one is the Doral Resort in Miami, is 167 million.
I believe some of those, Kyle, he full out just licenses the name. Like, for example, the Trump Hotel in Vegas, for example, the one in Vegas, I don't think he owns that one. I think he just licensed his brand.
Most of his hotels he doesn't own. It's licensed.
Right. Or he has a small percentage ownership. So the Doral it's worth 167 million, but in that case he has a $125 million loan on it. So they're only counting the equity in these properties. So resorts 730 million. New York City properties, apparently he has 720 million. So very close.
And he can no longer do business in New York, apparently. The judge has revoked all of his business licenses.
Well, I don't think that's been official yet. But so that's the New York City properties are some residential units, share of office and retail space, leaseholds on land, parking garages, storage units. He's got all kinds of stuff. But one example is that, the really big 1290 Avenue of America's building. Apparently that building is worth $2 billion, verified. But there's debt on it, and he only owns 30% of the building. So like it's not like he owns as much as Mar-a-Lago was the 300.
I'll take 30% of a $2 billion building.
I'll split it with you, Jay. I'll split it with you.
And then finally, the non-New York properties, it's only 230 million. So the biggest people would probably known is the one
Okay, I'm getting bored. Move on.
As Bank of America Tower in San Francisco, 30% of ownership, but that's about 167 million of his net worth right in that property too. Strangely, also hotels in places like Vegas and Chicago, which the one in Chicago apparently.
Jay said move on. I agree. Let's go. Let's move on.
Just finishing it off.
No,
I was getting to the point where apparently some of them were valued at negative, but okay, apparently that's
the hat has already gone sideways. And
I wanted to point out that they're not all super winners worth 167 million. He's got the Chicago one that's apparently negative, and he's bleeding money on. But anyway, okay.
He's also filed for bankruptcy on some of these like Macau hotels, right? These casinos.
All right. I'm skipping. We're getting pretty long in the tooth here, so I'm skipping the game. I'm going to do that next week. Let's do.
Nice, good. All right, good, great. So that's the technique, and I'm going to drag.
Well,
this
and AJ's
so
not even here, so
right.
I kind of want to hear AJ's opinions on these things. He gives a different opinion. You want to hear the opinion of the guy who has 2 private jets, right? When it comes to certain topics. All right, Jay, you got anything to plug this week?
Yeah. So anybody that wants to use my name, to license my name, put it on a hotel, on a casino, whatever, I am open for business. So feel free to reach out to me. You'll be the first.
Investwithj.com.
Invest with J. Actually, that works. You can go to investwithj.com. And yeah, I'm who the first person's going to get a major discount on the name. So don't miss this opportunity.
Mauricio, what do you got to plug here?
I moved my Real Estate Syndicator Live to Mondays at 11:30. So you can go to realestatesyndicatorlive.com, where we tackle anything related to real estate syndications. And Jay's been on a show twice. I think, Jay, you're due for a third one. Kyle just doesn't want to come on, so he's never been on. But Jay, we're due for a third episode. I think it's every 6 months. We're supposed to do an update.
When you say 11:30, you mean 2:30
Eastern time, 2:30 Eastern, 11:30 Pacific. Yes.
So, yeah, that's the correct time.
Mauricio, what happened to the new segment, the Mondays with Mauricio?
That is now my new email newsletter that goes out every Monday called Mondays with Mauricio. Dude, I'm ever evolving, Kyle. I'm not just a stagnant same thing over and over again. I'm constantly.
Would you say
moving.
you're dynamically?
Yeah, I'm a dynamic. Yeah. Who are you going to plug tonight, Kyle?
I'm plugging my wife. Actually, I heard her just come in, so she might be right here while I plug her. Follow Badass Investor on Instagram and YouTube. Go check her out. She's much better looking than Jay, and I would say even smarter. So,
And by the way, she's been putting out some great content on YouTube, so check her out on YouTube as well. She's been putting a lot of great effort and great content on her YouTube channel.
yeah, and I was working on her with her meme this afternoon too. It's going to be a funny one. So go check that out.
First person to leave a comment on Facebook, I'm giving away a book. So if you made it this far, leave a comment.
On Facebook? On what Facebook?
Not Facebook. I'm sorry, YouTube. I say Facebook.
On YouTube in general, or the specific episode of YouTube?
On this episode of YouTube, and your comment needs to be the name of one of my books, and that's the one I'm going to send you.
Wow. So what if your head's blocking? Can you move your head a little bit so we can see the other titles? We haven't all memorized them yet.
There you go.
All right.
You could have had fun with that and made some other game that someone has to comment, but that's fine. Because my drink is gone. I think it's time to hit the head. So I will see you next Tuesday.
See you guys.
See ya.